hope you're doing well. Thanks for tuning in. Today I want to look at Exodus chapter number 3, verse 1 through 6. It starts off, it says, Now Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro and the priest of Midian, and he led his flock to the west side of the wilderness, and he came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses says, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Now Moses had settled in as a shepherd. At the end of Exodus chapter number 2, he finds a new family and a new job as a shepherd. But 40 years have passed, and he's here in the Sinai area at the place called the Mountain of God. I'm not sure if they called it the Mountain of God because that's where people who still worship the Creator God went, or because of how significant it was going to be in the life of Moses and Israel into the future. So then he's there and he sees a bush. They have many bushes in this area. It's a very desolate kind of area, but to see a bush with a fire and not consumed, that's something quite different. So this is the appearance of the angel of the Lord. Very frequently when we see this term, the angel of the Lord, in the Old Testament, it's what's called a Christophany. It's a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus, who is God. And he comes as the angel of the Lord, and he calls out to him. Now, think about it. Moses grew up knowing that he had purpose in his life. And he knew that God had preserved him. He grows up in the palace as an adult man. He goes out and he looks at his people and they're suffering, and he intervenes at his own initiative and kills an Egyptian, and then he's running into exile. And year after year, he may have just come to resign himself to think that he had been abandoned by God, that his purpose had been missed. But even when we don't see it, God's working. We may feel like we've missed our purpose, but God's working. God, for 40 years, had Moses tending sheep, and he was preparing him for the future. Now, we have a plan, and we have an idea, and we have a timing, and we think it should all go that way. But remember, God's time is not our time, but it's the perfect time. In Acts chapter 7, Stephen, in his message to the Jews after the ascension of Christ, covers this very story. In verse 30, he says, Now when 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to him in the wilderness of Mount Sinai in a flame of fire in a bush. And when Moses saw it, he was amazed at the sight. And as he drew near to look, there was the voice of the Lord. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham and of Isaac and Jacob. And Moses trembled and did not dare to look. Then the Lord said to him, take off the sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. I have surely seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt, and have heard their groanings, and I have come down to deliver them. And now come, I will send you to Egypt. This Moses, whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and a judge? This man God sent as both ruler and redeemer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. You can imagine Moses hears the voice of the Lord, and he's commanded to remove his shoes, for it's a holy place. And you might say, well, what made it a holy place? The very fact that the Lord was present there. And his response was to look away, to be in absolute awe. He was afraid to look at God. Here's what I want you to understand. Everywhere the Lord is a holy place. And when we entrust ourselves to the finished work of Christ, we become that temple, that holy place. Moses was called out of respect to remove his shoes, and he did so and complied, but he refused to look at God. To come into the presence of God is to fear him, to be in reverent awe of his amazing majesty and glory. The fear of the Lord isn't a bad thing. The fear of the Lord is a good thing. When you read up into Revelation and a person comes into the presence of God, even an angelic force, they fall down flat on their face. Because to come into that full presence is to reveal our absolute need. I hope that I never lose that reverent awe of God. And at the same time recognize that God came to live in me by grace through faith. And he offers that same presence for you. You might look at yourself and say, man, I blew it. I missed my opportunity. God is always with us. He never leaves us and he never forsakes us. In our journey, we may have made some severe mistakes and consequences and suffered. But the promise of God, even from one like Moses, who murdered, was to work in him and prepare him. And I hope that you'll come to the Lord and say, Lord, here I am. He's calling you. If you haven't received him as your Savior, Lord, life, he's calling you. Entrust yourself to his perfect sacrifice. If you know you are his, but it's been a long time since you've been experiencing intimacy, hear his voice. Hear him say your name and say, here I am, Lord. At the very end of verse 6, it's powerful because he says, I'm the God of your father. I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He's the God of the living. Matthew 22:32, he says, I'm the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not a God of the dead, but of the living. Moses was not forgotten, and neither are you. I know there are times when we feel like we're all alone and we're in exile, just as Moses was, but he's always with us. We have the precious promise that he will never leave us or forsake us. We stand on holy ground because he makes us holy. His presence in us. And that's transformative, because everywhere I go and all that I'm about, he's with me. When Moses heard the Lord, he made himself available. I'm here. And why don't you and I today just consent? Lord, here we are. When you speak to us, when you call us, here we are. Where do you want us to go? What do you want us to say? How do you want us to give? Here we are. Here am I. Have a great day. Love you.